Chapter 2. Jean Valjean as a National Guard. However, properly speaking, he lived in the Rue Plumet, and he had arranged his existence there in the following fashion. Cosette and the servant occupied the pavilion. She had the big sleeping room with the painted pier glasses, the boudoir with the gilded fillets, the justice's drawing room furnished with tapestries and vast armchairs. She had the garden. Jean Valjean had a canopied bed of antique damask in 3 colors and a beautiful Persian rug purchased in the Rue du Figuier Saint Paul at Mother Goucher's, put into Cosette's chamber. And, in order to redeem the severity of these magnificent old things, he had amalgamated with this bric-a-brac all the gay and graceful little pieces of furniture suitable to young girls. An étagère, a bookcase filled with gilt-edged books, an inkstand, a blotting book, paper, a work table encrusted with mother-of-pearl, a silver gilt dressing case, a toilet service in Japanese porcelain. Long damask curtains with a red foundation and 3 colors, like those on the bed, hung at the windows of the first floor. On the ground floor, the curtains were of tapestry. All winter long, Cosette's little house was heated from top to bottom. Jean Valjean inhabited the sort of porter's lodge which was situated at the end of the back courtyard. With a mattress on a folding bed, a white wood table, 2 straw chairs, an earthenware water jug, a few old volumes on a shelf, his beloved valise in one corner, and never any fire. He dined with Cosette, and he had a loaf of black bread on the table for his own use. When Toussaint came, he had said to her, "It is the young lady who is the mistress of this house." "And you, monsieur?" Toussaint replied in amazement. "I am a much better thing than the master, I am the father." Cosette had been taught housekeeping in the convent, and she regulated their expenditure, which was very modest. Every day, Jean Valjean put his arm through Cosette's and took her for a walk. He led her to the Luxembourg, to the least frequented walk, and every Sunday he took her to Mass at Saint-Jacques-du-Haut-Pas, because that was a long way off. As it was a very poor quarter, he bestowed alms largely there, and the poor people surrounded him in church, which had drawn down upon him Thénardier's epistle to the benevolent gentlemen of the church of Saint-Jacques-du-Haut-Pas. He was fond of taking Cosette to visit the poor and the sick. No stranger ever entered the house in the Rue Plumet. Toussaint brought their provisions, and Jean Valjean went himself for water to a fountain nearby on the boulevard. Their wood and wine were put into a half-subterranean hollow lined with rockwork which lay near the Rue de Babylone and which had formerly served the Chief Justice as a grotto. For at the epoch of follies and little houses no love was without a grotto. In the door opening on the Rue de Babylone, there was a box destined for the reception of letters and papers. Only, as the 3 inhabitants of the pavilion in the Rue Plumet received neither papers nor letters, the entire usefulness of that box, formerly the go-between of a love affair, and the confidant of a lovelorn lawyer, was now limited to the tax collector's notices, and the summons of the guard. For M. Fauchelevent, independent gentleman, belonged to the National Guard. He had not been able to escape through the fine meshes of the census of 1831. The municipal information collected at that time had even reached the convent of the Petit Picpus. A sort of impenetrable and holy cloud, whence Jean Valjean had emerged in venerable guise, and, consequently, worthy of mounting guard in the eyes of the town hall. 3 or 4 times a year, Jean Valjean donned his uniform and mounted guard. He did this willingly, however. It was a correct disguise which mixed him with every one, and yet left him solitary. Jean Valjean had just attained his 60th birthday, the age of legal exemption. But he did not appear to be over 50. Moreover, he had no desire to escape his sergeant major nor to quibble with Comte de Lobau. He possessed no civil status, he was concealing his name, he was concealing his identity, so he concealed his age, he concealed everything. And, as we have just said, he willingly did his duty as a National Guard. The sum of his ambition lay in resembling any other man who paid his taxes. This man had for his ideal, within, the angel, without, the bourgeois. Let us note one detail, however. When Jean Valjean went out with Cosette, he dressed as the reader has already seen, and had the air of a retired officer. When he went out alone, which was generally at night, he was always dressed in a workingman's trousers and blouse, and wore a cap which concealed his face. Was this precaution or humility? Both. Cosette was accustomed to the enigmatical side of her destiny, and hardly noticed her father's peculiarities. As for Toussaint, she venerated Jean Valjean, and thought everything he did right. One day, her butcher, who had caught a glimpse of Jean Valjean, said to her, "That's a queer fish." She replied, "He's a saint." Neither Jean Valjean nor Cosette nor Toussaint ever entered or emerged except by the door on the Rue de Babylone. Unless seen through the garden gate, it would have been difficult to guess that they lived in the Rue Plumet. That gate was always closed. Jean Valjean had left the garden uncultivated, in order not to attract attention. In this, possibly, he made a mistake. V4B3C3, UK male, US female, US male, UK Fename Chapter 3. Follies AC Frondy Bus. The garden thus left to itself for more than half a century had become extraordinary and charming. The passers-by of 40 years ago halted to gaze at it, without a suspicion of the secrets which it hid in its fresh and verdant depths. More than one dreamer of that epoch often allowed his thoughts and his eyes to penetrate indiscreetly between the bars of that ancient, padlocked gate, twisted, tottering, fastened to two green and moss-covered pillars, and oddly crowned with a pediment of undecipherable arabesque. There was a stone bench in one corner, one or two mouldy statues, several lattices which had lost their nails with time, were rotting on the wall, and there were no walks nor turf. But there was enough grass everywhere. Gardening had taken its departure, and nature had returned. Weeds abounded, which was a great piece of luck for a poor corner of land. The festival of gilliflowers was something splendid. Nothing in this garden obstructed the sacred effort of things towards life. Venerable growth reigned there among them. The trees had bent over towards the nettles. The plant had sprung upward. The branch had inclined. That which crawls on the earth had gone in search of that which expands in the air. That which floats on the wind had bent over towards that which trails in the moss. Trunks, boughs, leaves, fibers, clusters, tendrils, shoots, spines, thorns, had mingled, crossed, married, confounded themselves in each other. Vegetation in a deep and close embrace had celebrated and accomplished there, under the well-pleased eye of the Creator, in that enclosure 300 feet square, the holy mystery of fraternity, symbol of the human fraternity. This garden was no longer a garden. It was a colossal thicket. That is to say, something as impenetrable as a forest, as peopled as a city, quivering like a nest, somber like a cathedral, fragrant like a bouquet, solitary as a tomb, living as a throng. In Florail. From April 19 to May 20. Closing square bracket. .34 This enormous thicket, free behind its gate and within its four walls, entered upon the secret labor of germination, quivered in the rising sun, almost like an animal which drinks in the breaths of cosmic love, and which feels the sap of April rising and boiling in its veins, and shakes to the wind its enormous wonderful green locks, sprinkled on the damp earth, on the defaced statues, on the crumbling steps of the pavilion, and even on the pavement of the deserted street, flowers like stars, dew like pearls, fecundity, beauty, life, joy, perfumes. At midday, 1,000 white butterflies took refuge there, and it was a divine spectacle to see that living summer snow whirling about there in flakes amid the shade. There, in those gay shadows of verdure, a throng of innocent voices spoke sweetly to the soul, and what the twittering forgot to say the humming completed. In the evening, a dreamy vapor exhaled from the garden and enveloped it. A shroud of mist, a calm and celestial sadness covered it. The intoxicating perfume of the honeysuckles and convolvulus poured out from every part of it, like an exquisite and subtle poison. The last appeals of the woodpeckers and the wagtails were audible as they dozed among the branches. One felt the sacred intimacy of the birds and the trees. By day the wings rejoice the leaves, by night the leaves protect the wings. In winter the thicket was black, dripping, bristling, shivering, and a loathsome glimpse of the house. Instead of flowers on the branches and dew in the flowers, the long silvery tracks of the snails were visible on the cold, thick carpet of yellow leaves. But in any fashion, under any aspect, at all seasons, spring, winter, summer, autumn, this tiny enclosure breathed forth melancholy, contemplation, solitude, liberty, the absence of man, the presence of God. And the rusty old gate had the air of saying, "This garden belongs to me." It was of no avail that the pavements of Paris were there on every side. The classic and splendid hotels of the Rue de Varennes a couple of paces away, the dome of the Invalides close at hand, the Chamber of Deputies not far off. The carriages of the Rue de Bourgogne and of the Rue Saint-Dominique rumbled luxuriously. In vain, in the vicinity, in vain did the yellow, brown, white, and red omnibuses cross each other's course at the neighboring crossroads. The Rue Plumet was the desert. And the death of the former proprietors. The revolution which had passed over it. The crumbling away of ancient fortunes. Absence. Forgetfulness. 40 years of abandonment and widowhood had sufficed to restore to this privileged spot ferns, mulleins, hemlock, yarrow, tall weeds, great crimped plants, with large leaves of pale green cloth, lizards, beetles, uneasy and rapid insects. To cause to spring forth from the depths of the earth and to reappear between those four walls a certain indescribable and savage grandeur. And for nature, which disconcerts the petty arrangements of man, and which sheds herself always thoroughly where she diffuses herself at all. In the ant as well as in the eagle, to blossom out in a petty little Parisian garden with as much rude force and majesty as in a virgin forest of the New World. Nothing is small, in fact. Anyone who is subject to the profound and penetrating influence of nature knows this. Although no absolute satisfaction is given to philosophy, either to circumscribe the cause or to limit the effect, the contemplator falls into those unfathomable ecstasies caused by these decompositions of force terminating in unity. Everything toils at everything. Algebra is applied to the clouds. The radiation of the star profits the rose. No thinker would venture to affirm that the perfume of the hawthorn is useless to the constellations. Who, then, can calculate the course of a molecule? How do we know that the creation of worlds is not determined by the fall of grains of sand? Who knows the reciprocal ebb and flow of the infinitely great and the infinitely little, the reverberations of causes in the precipices of being, and the avalanches of creation? The tiniest worm is of importance. The great is little, the little is great. Everything is balanced in necessity. Alarming vision for the mind. There are marvelous relations between beings and things. In that inexhaustible whole, from the sun to the grub, nothing despises the other. All have need of each other. The light does not bear away terrestrial perfumes into the azure depths, without knowing what it is doing. The night distributes stellar essences to the sleeping flowers. All birds that fly have round their leg the thread of the infinite. Germination is complicated with the bursting forth of a meteor and with the peck of a swallow cracking its egg, and it places on one level the birth of an earthworm and the advent of Socrates. Where the telescope ends, the microscope begins. Which of the two possesses the larger field of vision? Choose. A bit of mold is a pleiad of flowers. A nebula is an ant-hill of stars. The same promiscuousness, and yet more unprecedented, exists between the things of the intelligence and the facts of substance. Elements and principles mingle, combine, wed, multiply with each other, to such a point that the material and the moral world are brought eventually to the same clearness. The phenomenon is perpetually returning upon itself. In the vast cosmic exchanges the universal life goes and comes in unknown quantities, rolling entirely in the invisible mystery of effluvia, employing everything, not losing a single dream, not a single slumber, sowing an animalcule here, crumbling to bits a planet there, oscillating and winding, making of light a force and of thought an element, disseminated and invisible, dissolving all, except that geometrical point, the eye, bringing everything back to the sole atom, expanding everything in God, entangling all activity, from summit to base, in the obscurity of a dizzy mechanism, attaching the flight of an insect to the movement of the earth, subordinating, who knows? Were it only by the identity of the law, the evolution of the comet in the firmament to the whirling of the infusoria in the drop of water. A machine made of mind. Enormous gearing, the prime motor of which is the gnat, and whose final wheel is the zodiac.